Hello, Vicky. How are you today?
Hello, I am doing great. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. And I love how we were just sort of both reminiscing a minute ago before we went on air about our respective experiences at Health 2024. Do you feel recovered at this point? It was quite a lot, wasn't it?
It was exciting. It was a lot. I definitely feel, well, I guess starting to recover and catch up with email and everything else. But it was a super fun meeting for sure.
Yeah, likewise. And I live in Massachusetts, so I had to travel a little bit out to Nevada. So it takes like half a day to get there, half a day to get back, plus the time changes. So it was a big commitment, but I'm really glad that we were there.
Great. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it was an easier trip for me from the Bay Area, but I
Nice.
also did have a quick pit stop to New York last week.
Oh
At
wow.
the
Okay.
Yes.
That's hardly a pit stop, but I appreciate it. Oh my goodness. Well, again, thank you. We are speaking with Vicky Demas, the CEO of Identify Health, and I'm very excited to speak with you today. Eye care and challenges associated with optometry, ophthalmology have always been really fascinating to me. Probably because I have very poor eyesight and I'm dealing with a little bit of some eye conditions as I age, which is not fun, but just a part of life. And so I'm very excited to hear about the things that you folks are doing. I'd love to start, Vicky, with just a little bit about you. And maybe we could talk a little bit about what inspired you into where you are today at Identify Health, and of course love to talk a little bit about identified health before we get into all the goodness that has been your fascinating journey.
Yes, of course. Excited to talk about Identify and a little bit of my journey.
Yeah,
So, Identify, maybe I'll start with that for a second to
sure.
say we are leveraging AI and automation to make, as you said, retinal screening more accessible at scale, bring it closer to the patients.
Mm,
Our goal is to start with preventing avoidable vision loss, specifically from diabetic retinopathy, which is a
sure.
huge problem.
Big problem.
Um,
Yeah.
yes, and then we really want to also, the way we think about the retina, we see its power to become the non-invasive diagnostic platform of our time. There's a
Mm,
ton of information that, again, by making retinal screening accessible, we can start then leveraging AI to screen for different types of disease, including for systemic disease.
wow.
Yes, so very excited
So
about
much
that.
potential. Yeah, so much excitement.
Yes. Then a little bit about me and how I ended up where I am.
Yeah.
I usually tell people it seems, if you're looking from the outside, that it was a really nice kind of linear path, but it
Never is.
totally,
Never is,
exactly,
right?
yes. Yes. But let's see, I decided I wanted to be an engineer at an early age because
Mm,
I was very curious. I wanted to
hmm
understand, nature, science, etc., like my surroundings. But I also was super excited about building things, building functionality,
Hmm.
inspired from my dad at an early age.
Was he
Um,
an engineer, your dad?
he was an
Yeah.
engineer.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and he did spend a lot of time building toys and things with me, just kind of gave me an appreciation, I guess, of,
Yeah.
of engineering. And then in my path and journey as an engineer, I really discovered, I guess, the power of engineering and technology to help patients.
Right.
And I still remember kind of that was a little bit the inspiration the first time that a product that I had helped build, or bring to life during our pivotal testing, we were able to save a patient.
Mm.
And I just fell in love with the concept and wanted to really spend my career building products and platforms to help patients, and that has been the one sort of consistent theme
Mm.
in the last 20-25 years of my career.
So that was kind of the defining moment, if you will, where you saw the intersection of your science and your engineering come together in a way that made you excited specifically about care of individuals, patient care.
Exactly,
Wow.
exactly.
That's pretty cool. And like you say, nobody has a linear path, right? Everybody has these very curvy and
Yes.
non-specific transverses, right, to how they get to where they have been. It's exciting. I would love to hear a little bit more, Vicky, about your vision for Identify Health. You mentioned a couple of things there. I know a lot of what you are doing, and I don't want to misspeak and call it democratization, but it certainly seems like that's a lot of what you are doing and leveraging the AI technology, whether it be for, retinal disorders, retinopathy, or like you said, vision loss associated to diabetes. Is it really a fair statement to say that you see transforming as accessibility, and AI is a big part of that?
For sure. And actually, this is a general trend in our days, I guess, with AI. I really do believe in the ability of leveraging AI
Mm,
to really remove some of the main issues with accessibility due to staff shortages, right? Like,
sure.
kind of just that we see, especially in healthcare, and making sure that we can build products and services that can for sure be democratized. And obviously, our first applications, we are looking for sure for reimbursement, etc. But you can also think that once we actually launch our platform,
Yeah.
and we have a revenue stream, we can subsidize for those who don't have health insurance or for
Oh,
future
exciting.
tests. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it is really, really, truly exciting.
Yeah, that's kind of a different economic model than I think what I'm used to hearing, where you're actually looking to bring subsidy as part of your overall solution delivery.
Yeah, so this is the our baseline business model is
Hmm.
pretty straightforward in a sense. So we actually are building a platform that we
Hmm.
will be selling, potentially leasing. There will be a subscription, sort of like, right, like, kind of just starting to feel a little bit more as a
Makes sense.
SaaS model.
Yep.
And then there is a per test fee. That's at least how we're thinking of the overall structure.
Got it.
Um, but and where I'm headed to is that for our first product for diabetic retinopathy screening,
Hmm.
we actually there is a reimbursement code and there is insurance
Sure.
coverage, and there is a huge push and motivation now also health systems to try to actually get their patients under management who live with diabetes to get screened annually because this is such a huge problem.
Right.
But where I'm headed to is once we deploy the platform, you
Hmm.
can think a little bit as the infrastructure now has been paid for,
Right.
and has been placed, and then you can look for the smaller sort of like 10% that might not have insurance coverage in this particular case, that we could at no additional cost to us from a platform perspective or to the health system, we
Yeah.
can actually run the test. Obviously at the beginning we're looking to work with a teleretinal service, so it's not as simple,
Sure.
but we are also working to launch AI-based diagnostic and screening products. So you can see how, from an economics financial perspective, we can
Yes.
make this truly, truly accessible.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And again, I love the idea of how you're trying to increase the accessibility. The AI is there part of the clinical aspects of it, but also sort of the accessibility, the economics, the almost like the transferability aspects of it as well. That's very exciting. It's very exciting.
Thank
Um,
you.
back to you for a second. You have a very impressive scientific background, a technical background. You've made this shift now to leadership. You're building cross-functional teams, you're building a company. Are you still doing hands-on science, Vicky? I mean, how are you making that transition? How is that all working for you?
Ah, it has been going back to my nonlinear path. I think it was back in my first startup that it was sort of like, I mean, I go back to maybe just for a second to say I've always
Sure.
been driven by that sort of like the curiosity, right? And the
Hmm.
desire to
Well,
learn
you're an
things
engineer.
and
That
just
makes sense.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then to also make a positive impact.
Mm,
So when I was at my very first startup, I was hired for my technical expertise. I did my PhD in portable magnetic resonance,
mm,
and we were building a diagnostic platform based on magnetic resonance as the detector. And I joined the startup. I focused on the problem that I was supposed to be solving, and I solved it. And then it started becoming obvious that for us to actually build a successful product, we needed to figure out how to accelerate our assay development efforts. It was a nanoparticle-based diagnostic.
Okay.
So I ended up using my engineering background, working closely with our chemists and molecular biologists to figure out what problems they were trying to solve, how to create a framework for them to actually optimize
Yeah,
experiments or
start
design.
accelerating that whole process, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And then build the technology for them to run higher throughput tests, etc., screen, and then also translating the work from the bench into the system. So I
Mm-hmm.
became more like a systems engineer, then starting to work with figuring out, like, this is what happens in a startup. You wear
Yeah.
multiple
You wear
hats.
multiple hats, and 1 minute you're thinking about scalability and process and throughput, and the next minute you're on an investor call, right?
Exactly. And part of it was also coming to that realization that you have to make impact, but you also have to create financial incentives for someone to help you accelerate and advocate for
Sure.
what you're doing.
Right.
Even though, right, like, you would think, like, naively, at least like at the time I was as a young engineer thinking, well, but like we can help a patient's life, right? Like, so you also need to think through the economics, unfortunately, or
Right.
fortunately, I guess, like this is.
Yeah.
But the good thing is, I guess, when you are creating positive impact, usually economics follows. So that was a little
Sure.
bit where I convinced myself that I care more about solving the problem than staying committed, maybe I'll call it, to my trade and my science, as
Sure.
much as I
Sure.
love it.
As
And
much as you
there's
love it, right? Yeah.
exactly. And I will say nothing takes away from that instant gratification of like solving an engineering problem. I don't know how to, best to describe it other than
Sure.
that. But I guess where I'm headed to is in saying that I I have been able to switch back and forth between helping with technical problems versus focusing on
Mm,
business versus
mm,
focusing on building a team
mm.
quite a bit. And my team today will tell you that, for better or worse, I a lot of times will tell them when there is a problem, like, guys, I'm still an engineer. I want to be part of that brainstorming session.
What a part of that solution. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You got to fly high and fly low sometimes, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's exciting. And and you've got some pretty interesting diversity to your teams. One of the things that people do ask when they listen to these kinds of episodes on the show is how'd you get there, right? How did you find your people? How did you assemble your team, Vicky?
Yeah.
Especially in a high stakes field that you're in.
For sure. So
Yeah.
the team is at the core of everything, and I'll tell you, like, everything that I've ever done, it's like,
Mm,
you'll hear people speak about this, right? If you don't have the right team, the right culture, I don't care how impressive your strategy is, it's not going to be, the probability of success will be relatively low, and if anything,
hmm
too, like, people will kind of hate it. So for me, it's always been about, and especially at identifeye, we've been able to do it because we've done it from scratch, if you wish, is to really decide on our culture and the values, that we really want to align around.
hmm
And so when we're hiring the team, and obviously a lot of the folks at, the company have also been, like, close relationships, former colleagues, like, right, like, you work with
Right.
people you love, then you want
Right.
to work with them again. But we hire, both for sort of like the functional expertise and helping solve, right, bringing a particular,
Mm,
skill set, but also leadership potential, also, as I said, alignment with our culture and values. And for us at identifeye in particular is we really are here because we want to help patients.
right.
We want to make, we call it data driven decisions, takes kind of like the emotion out of decision making, also makes it very clear that obviously we're a startup. We do our best to collect the right set of data, but we're
Sure.
moving
Sometimes as
fast.
a startup, you moving fast, you have to make decisions with a little bit lower data, lower
Exactly.
data fidelity than you potentially would like, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
But also being open about, we made a big assumption because of lack of data or
Right.
minimum data. It makes it unemotional if you have to go back and question and say, we
Mhm.
made a mistake, guys, right? Like, let's now
Right.
pivot because, right, like, it wasn't anyone's fault. It was more, we
Right.
did the best we could.
We acted upon what we knew at that time, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
And then for us, like, something that I feel very strongly about, obviously, as a being very team oriented. What we're
Mm.
trying to do is hard, kind of
Sure.
like
Yeah.
so there's no reason to add additional difficulty.
Right.
It's like I want to do it with people we like, right? Like the team likes each other, likes hanging out with each other. This would be people like I hope to have in my life for like,
Right.
for
Yeah.
for
You're
for, for
working a
long
lot
term.
of hours together. You're like you said, you're trudging through really hard problems, and you don't want to do that with people you don't want to be around, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So,
That's
and,
cool.
and that's how it is, like, right? Like, you build an amazing team, and then, like,
Mm.
right, like within each function, like, I have incredible functional leads that are applying the same principles. I try to meet everyone in the team. I try to be accessible.
Mm.
The team comes together. So again, like, it's like really, again, reinforcing we have a good hiring practice, and then we really continue to build the team dynamic and spend time really being a team, right? Like, we're not
Right.
just a group of incredible individuals, but we're an incredible team.
I really appreciate too, Vicky, what you just said about one, team being at the center of it all, right? And then secondly, your vision for the company and your culture for the company, which is also the patient is at the center of everything that we do, right?
Correct.
And you've spent some time at Google Life Sciences and Verily, and um, kind of how did those experiences shape your approach to what you're doing at Identify Health? I know myself, I worked at very large organizations and do feel the benefit of that now that I've also worked for startups, because there are some really important things, frameworks, etc. you can take from the larger organizations. I'm curious as to, what maybe you found valuable to bring out of those organizations and into Identify Health.
Yeah, I think you said it really well, and I think the whole concept of having a framework that then you can figure out how to apply to problems, maybe a more appropriate scale, obviously for a startup. But
Sure.
some of these principles, right? Like, even speaking about building a team as an example, Google did a tremendous job at sort of like standardizing how we do interviews, right? Like, how do
Mm.
we onboard
Right.
new employees, members of our team, making sure that they have a buddy. So
Yeah,
we
good stuff to
actually,
take from.
right,
Yeah. Yep.
great practices, both in terms of, again, selecting talent, making sure that the experience is positive, that the interviews are consistent, that the way that we're actually bringing people, I tell sort of the team, like, the way that I feel is that even if you're not going to hire someone, you
Hmm.
want or they don't want to come eventually, or maybe it's just, it doesn't happen to be a mutual fit at that moment. You want them to come out of this saying, oh my gosh, like, I met incredible people, I'm rooting for what they're doing, right? Like, it's like you want to create positive energy, positive
Yeah.
connections. So that's an example. Obviously, figuring out how to build a development framework for building the team, developing the team members. That's another good example, how we do our performance reviews, like
Yeah. Yeah.
feedback,
Think about
calibrations.
competencies and those things. Sure. Yep.
Exactly. And then there were other more like on the technical side of things. Like, I was super lucky because at Google specifically, part of my job was to help create the life sciences initiatives that
Hmm.
then, spun out as GLS and then rebranded to Verily.
Mm.
And there we got to also experiment and play quite a bit with how do you build a portfolio of projects. Like, if you are
Oh,
someone is
yeah.
coming in and saying, okay, so now you can innovate, right? Like, try to leverage tools to work, like, to solve problems worth solving. How do you actually
Mm.
go about doing that?
Doing
So
that.
it
Yeah.
was, yeah. And that was incredibly fun because, again, like, helps you think through sort of like balancing the risk, like having programs that are high risk, high value, high potential, but also having some things that are a little bit more straightforward, so you're kind
Sure.
of spreading how to stay agile, work with the right people externally as well, like leaders in the space, to really
Hmm.
figure out how to fine tune the mission, the objectives, etc. um, to your point earlier, how to build incredible cross-functional teams.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I feel blessed, like yourself in some cases, to have had the opportunities to kind of had some of my more formative years in these larger organizations, where maybe you did get frustrated because innovation, let's say, didn't move at the speed you wanted it to, or there were other political climates or things that led to a challenge. But, to your point, there's so many good things you can lift and shift as it pertains to those frameworks, right? Those processes, those pieces. So I'm excited to hear that you were able to do that.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And
Yeah.
obviously, like, I focused on the positive aspects, but
Yeah.
you nailed it as well. Like, I am a startup person, so you
Right.
highlighted exactly. It's not easy, trust me, leaving Google. But
Sure.
but part of it was exactly this, that I was like, our time is finite, and
Hmm.
I really want to see the impact. Like, we really need to push things fast, and you can only achieve that at a startup.
Yeah. And we've had a lot of great women leaders on this show like yourself who have also had those same kind of pivotal moments of like, I'm in a safe environment. And you can obviously argue, is anything really safe, right? I mean, but
Course.
I'm in a stable environment, and there's something that's gnawing at me or calling me, right, towards something that I feel like I can't accomplish in this environment. And that's kind of what was the impetus for me to kind of stand out on my own, go out on my own, take a bet on myself, right? And try something that's a lot more maybe risky, I don't know, but certainly allows you to feel a lot more motivated to, the problem that's gnawing at you that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, and I think when I think about it, like for me, the leaving the when I left Verily at the time, it was more about being excited
Mm,
about being able to have more of an impact with a different team, and that was when I moved to Grail
mm,
with a team that I knew,
sure.
versus also knowing that when I was going to leave my teams at Google, I knew exactly what they'd be working on. We had set up clear objectives for the next, couple of years. They had
Yeah.
funding. I believed, again, going back to building incredible teams, like there were some incredible people, my technical leads, et cetera, that I was thinking it's going to be an opportunity for them to also
Right.
grow farther if I'm not there. So there were like a combination of reasons that help with that transition. But to your point, like I also feel we end up becoming in life sort of like we're the collection, I guess, like of our experiences. And if you're content with who you are, for
Then
better
that's
or
great.
worse,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. Do that. Yeah, I love that. Vicky, you have so much experience, and you mentioned Grail a second ago, and all of the work you've done in advanced diagnostic testing and really kind of groundbreaking technology and driving them to market. What, again, I feel your passion about patient centricity and democratization of this and accessibility of that, but really kind of what makes you most, what drives you most in this journey? Because this is not easy stuff that you're working on here.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
I think you highlighted exactly, which is being able to work alongside an incredible team
Mm,
to do something that I feel is pushing the boundaries of what's possible, leverage
sure.
technology, to really kind of, I don't want to say transform, it sounds like so grandiose, right? Like, healthcare, but really, yes, make healthcare more accessible,
Accessibility. Sure.
help,
Yeah.
right? Like help diagnose disease early.
Which, by the way,
And more,
is transformative in and of itself, right? I mean, just
yes,
bringing more accessibility is in the current state of healthcare in this country, just increasing accessibility is transformative,
yes,
you know?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Um, as you know, this is a podcast platform that's dedicated to female founders, female CEOs. You are in a predominantly male dominated industry. I'm curious, Vicky, how have you pivoted through that? Who's your community, I guess? Like who's got your back, and what are the moments that you really are that you tend to reflect on?
Yeah, so I think I'll kind of just it's always a tough question, right?
Sure,
Because
sure.
yes, there are for sure challenges, and maybe like I'll say even more so, like you can imagine that there are potentially, let's call them negative biases.
Yes.
Sometimes subtle,
Yep.
sometimes not as subtle.
Right.
And and this has been something that has been present, I'll say early in my career as
Sure.
a female engineer. By the time I was getting my PhD, I was
Mhm.
less than 10% of the class. Like it's a, um, and I'll say there have been assumptions, right? Like based on, and it's probably a combination. I'm a female with an accent who was a lot heavier 20 some years ago.
Sure.
Um, so maybe people assumed, maybe like I'll say, your technical functional expertise
Hmm.
and leadership potential or approach to leadership
Mm.
might not be as accurate reflection of the reality.
Sure.
But then there are a couple of things, and the one you really touched on it, which is creating a network of people that you can rely on, right? That they mentor you, that they support you, that they see beyond biases and really focus on data. And the
Hmm.
second part is really sort of focusing on that, exactly that, switching from an expectation based on, a stereotype, I guess,
Right.
to really focusing on data and delivering
Results.
results.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. Yeah.
So that has been kind of like, and then figuring out, and you'll see now we go back to my culture comment, that because I'm so focused on data, results, etc., then, and because I like working with people
Hmm.
who also kind of just follow these values, then it makes it easy to create that network, right? And
Yeah,
and work with
absolutely.
people who really kind of just see that, and they don't really, and by the way, that then you end up creating a fully diverse team, like our,
Yes.
and
Which is what you want. Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And who's in your corner, Vicky? Who's your
Oh,
community that you
yeah.
you rely on? Other female CEOs or your mentors, advisors?
I am super lucky because I
Mm,
have an incredible network of people throughout my
mm,
career, both male and female. Actually, some of my biggest supporters have been former colleagues or managers, mentors that are male, but also, of course, female as well.
hmm.
We'll start with my support network is huge, and we're starting with family because
That's
I come
great.
from a super supportive family.
That's amazing.
Thank you. Yes. Very, very lucky. Of course, I have incredible friends. And what was very interesting going back to by the time I was getting my PhD at Berkeley, I was
Mm,
in the minority. We actually built a network with several of my lab mates.
okay.
And we have stayed in touch. So these are now female tech leaders, professors,
You've come a
etc. So
long way from the lab, right?
we
Yeah.
we've come a long way from the lab, but
But
we
isn't it
also,
amazing that you're all still in contact with each other? That's fabulous.
isn't it
Yeah.
exactly?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have this incredible group. Like
I'm picturing like a group text that you guys are all.
yes, actually spot on, because during the pandemic we created this group text that we daily actually exchange information, like you won't believe what happened today. So we all kind of just bring in the, I'm struggling with something, or I'm
I
excited
love it.
about something. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's incredible. It's truly incredible.
Outstanding.
Yeah. And then, as I said, yeah, I mean, I've been lucky to work with some exceptional people,
Sure.
and whether they are now still in the industry versus,
Mm,
they're investors, etc. Especially the time at Google, because it was sort of like building an incubator. So we
sure.
spun out companies, joint ventures, brought in, like, a lot of advisors. Again, like incredible group. And I feel like if I start naming, like it's gonna
Yeah,
become
I'll be here all day.
excessive.
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. But I can't tell you. It's like I am so fortunate, and I wouldn't be able to do anything if it wasn't for this incredible support network that I'm lucky to have.
Oh, your humility is very inspiring, Vicky. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Vicky, we kind of started with health, and I feel like we can end with health in the sense that there's so much happening in healthcare innovation right now, right? Some of it is, I think, real. Some of it might be hype, right? There are so many advancements happening. Hopefully, those advancements are leading to significant breakthroughs. You're very focused on diagnostics. Where do you see Identify Health kind of fitting into this, this formulary or this calculus of healthcare innovation, in maybe just the diagnostic space, but then maybe even beyond. I'm sure you're thinking beyond diagnostics as well.
Yeah. So first, I think for sure, like when I think of future healthcare diagnostics, etc., I think continuing to develop tools and embrace tools, to bridge gaps, I'll call them, and going back to my theme of accessible early detection, preventive care, because for the majority of disease, like that's kind of like
That's what you want
the
to do. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think that is going to be a big theme and something that will continue to happen. And with AI, continuing to mature, I'll call it. Obviously, it's
Sure.
gotten a lot of publicity and, to your point, hype in the last couple of years. but there's it's been happening for quite some time now.
Right.
And I think, yes, there's hype, but there's also a lot of substance. The way that I think of it and the way that it also fits in with how we leverage AI at identifeye is really using it to drive also automation, or along with automation to automate specifically tasks that humans understand.
Right.
And
Right.
for
That's an
example,
important
we know
distinction. Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it is, and
Yeah.
I'll go. This is not my saying, and I'm not going to try to quote the person because I'm sure I'll misquote it. But the essence is like progress happens at the speed of trust,
Yes.
and
Yes.
saying that we're going to come up with AI that will magically solve all the problems and do all these things. Like, maybe one day, right?
Sure.
But today it's all about making jobs easier, automating tasks that enable then healthcare providers to really focus on things
Sure.
that right, like are more like practice at the top of their
We always,
life.
yeah, we talk about this. How do they practice at the top of their license, right? How,
Exactly.
especially I think of like the younger people entering the clinical side of healthcare today, it's overwhelming, right? And
It
we
is.
have to give them the opportunity to practice at the top of their license and remove so many of these other, let's just call them remedial things that they really shouldn't be focused on, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying eventually will be great because, right, like, you can start thinking even like in medical imaging applications. So when we're
Sure.
thinking about our first AI that will be looking at retinal scans to make a call as to whether a patient needs to be seen by a specialist because either we've detected more than mild diabetic retinopathy or because there's something we can interpret, for example.
Sure.
So that's a simple problem that you can train an AI, like based algorithm to do, and then you can also envision that eventually, with a lot of data, you can look at more and more things, but it's going to be progressive because.
Right.
I think the CrowdStrike example was like a really good example to
Yeah,
say,
that was, yeah.
right, like it happened and I was stranded on EWR and I was like,
Oh,
oh man,
goodness.
that sucks. Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
But can you imagine being a healthcare provider preparing for
Surgery
operating?
or, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And all of a sudden this happens. Yeah.
So implications are different and I fully like understand.
Sure.
So what I'm truly excited when I think of identifeye and the future of healthcare is really kind of just building close partnerships with healthcare systems, becoming sort of like again, because we're focusing on building user-friendly platform that is capable of enabling, I guess, like retinal screening becoming part of standard of care, or bringing it in your standard practices, but also then enabling this whole sort of like detection of a range of systemic diseases that otherwise we couldn't envision. But working again, like right, like really hand in hand with the systems to your point, also starting to think about, well, how do we engage the patient, the healthcare
Sure.
customer?
Right.
How, right, like what makes it easier for them
To
to
be
follow
involved.
up, to be
Yep.
involved? Exactly. Is it understanding, teaching them?
Mm-hmm.
Right, like so we're for sure thinking more holistically about becoming an integral part, to support again, like overall health and wellness, and enable personalized medicine.
We have been speaking with Vicky Demas. You are an innovator, a scientist, an engineer, a CEO, so many ways to describe you. And your passion for what you are doing is clearly evident. And I'm very excited to see what you and your team are going to do here in diagnostics and keep moving this chapter forward. So once again, Vicky, thank you so much for being a part of our conversation today and sharing the identifeye health story and sharing your story as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me and giving me a chance to share the story. We're for sure very, very excited.
Great. Well, we'll be watching close. Thank you so much.
Thank you.